Hey, you know that smooth part of your brain that's supposed to hold all your knowledge of the causes and effects of the French and Indian War? Well, I reckon you're here to get that thing all kinds of wrinkly, and I'm here to help. So if you're ready to get them brain cows milked, let's get to it. So we are now in a new time period, namely 1754 to 1800. And if you'll recall, tensions between the colonies and Big Mama Britain started heating up at the end of the last period on account of several things. But most important here was that Great Britain went ahead and shut down the colonists' ability to migrate and settle westward into the Ohio River Valley. And chief among the reasons for that prohibition was Britain's concern that westward migration would create two related problems. First, migration into the Ohio River Valley would spark conflict with the indigenous groups living there. And it turns out the British were right about this. As the colonists thumbed their noses at the British prohibition and moved westward anyway, they encountered stiff resistance from an indigenous alliance led by the Shawnees and the Delawares. And then the second problem the British feared was a conflict with the French, who happened to claim all that land for their own selves. And as it turns out, Big Mama Britain was right to fear such a thing because, well, it ended up sparking a whole dang war as more and more colonists moved into the area. And as it turns out, the inciting incident for this war was committed in 1753 by none other than our boy George Washington. So Washington was appointed lieutenant colonel of the Virginia militia and sent to confront the French about encroaching on British territory in the Ohio River Valley. Long story short, the French commander at Fort Duquesne ignored Washington's warning.
Sir Washington, do you not have a cherry tree to chop down somewhere?
And then Washington, being no fan of a proper French snub, returned several months later with his own men and their American Indian allies and attacked the French. Anyway, in the end, Washington and his men got hammered by the French and had to retreat. Regardless, this skirmish marked the beginning of the French and Indian War. Now, if you know your European history, Britain and France were at war like every other weekend. But this one was unique in that it started in North America and then spread somewhat worldwide into a larger conflict that became known as the 7 Years' War. But anyway, once the war broke out, Britain understood pretty quickly that to have any shot of protecting themselves against French encroachment, they needed a powerful alliance with American Indians. And to that end, the British called the Albany Congress, whose chief purpose was to forge an alliance with the Iroquois Confederacy. And while the Iroquois initially wanted to remain neutral in order to keep trading prospects open with both the French and the British, eventually they did end up supporting the British in the conflict. And meanwhile, the French secured alliances with the Algonquin and Huron peoples. Anyway, something important happened at the Albany Congress that you're gonna need to remember. Our boy Benjamin Franklin proposed the Albany Plan of Union, which would create a council made up of delegates from all the colonies. They would have the power to tax and raise militias for the common defense and create lasting strategic relations with American Indians. And while this effort marked the most significant first attempt to unite the colonies under a single representative body, the plan failed miserably. And that's because colonial leaders thought that the plan took away too much of their power to govern themselves independently. But then on the other side of the ocean, Great Britain poo-pooed the plan because they felt like it took away too much of their authority over the colonies. So sorry, Ben, no colonial union for you. And hey, before I tell you about who won the war and all the effects it had, let me tell you that you might want to check out my APUSH Heimler review guide if you want to get an A in your class and a 5 on your exam in May. It has everything you need to study as fast as possible, like exclusive unit review videos that you're not going to see here on YouTube, note guides to follow along, practice multiple choice questions for each unit, full-length practice exams, and answer keys for every dang bit of it. So if that's the kind of help you need, then get that clicky finger out and check the link in the description. Okay, so here's where I tell you that even though over the course of the war the French seemed to be mopping the floor with the British actually ended up winning the war. And one of the main reasons for the British victory was that the British colonists way outnumbered the French in North America. I mean, that's what I've been telling you since Unit 1. The British colonists were multiplying like mad, and by the time the war broke out, they outnumbered the French by a factor of 10.
That's a lot of colonists, Steve.
It sure is, and that advantage led to a British victory in the signing of the Peace of Paris in 1763. Now, that peace treaty fundamentally changed the map of North America, and that's going to have some serious consequences. So Spain ceded Florida to Great Britain in order to get their hands back on Cuba and the Philippines, which again signals the global nature of this war. And then France ceded their territory west of the Mississippi River to Spain. And then the biggest deal of all, France gave up their territory in the Ohio River Valley to Great Britain. And oh, what a time to rejoice for the British colonists. Like, that's all they ever wanted, was to migrate into this area and get their agriculture on. And baby, that's exactly what they did, and everybody was happy. But here comes Big Mama Britain to shut down the migration party quick, fast, and in a hurry. You see, even though these lands were now altogether Frenchless, they were still home to a fantastic array of American Indian groups who, to put it mildly, were not too excited to see this flood of colonists gobbling up their territory. And by American Indian reckoning, the British were definitely worse than the French, since the French honored local gift-giving traditions and didn't create large settlements. But the British were opposite on both counts. And so, in response to this fresh wave of migration, an indigenous leader named Pontiac assembled an alliance of Ottawa, Potawatomi, and Huron leaders to resist British encroachment. They went ahead and launched attacks against British settlements, and as news of the attacks spread through the colonies, British colonists retaliated. And this got Britain real cranky because the colonists were fighting with American American Indians as a whole without distinguishing which one was an ally and which one was a foe. And so, since Big Mama was real tired and real broke from fighting the 7 Years' War, she really didn't want to devote more resources to putting down the conflicts erupting in the Ohio River Valley. So Parliament issued the Proclamation of 1763, which forbade British colonists from migrating west beyond the Appalachian Mountains. And the colonists, to put it mildly, were, not fans of this move. I mean, in their minds, the whole stinking point of the war that they themselves had fought was to gain possession of this land so that they could migrate west. And now here's this law saying that they have to keep their hind parts in the east because Britain isn't willing to do the work that it takes to open the opportunities for migration. So yeah, this got the colonists all kinds of resentful with respect to their imperial overlords across the sea. But from Great Britain's perspective, it was a different story altogether. I mean, yes, they had won the war against France and gained all this territory, but it cost a fortune to do so. In fact, during the course of the war, Great Britain's national debt doubled, and that meant that they were in a precarious situation economically. And then, to further add to their economic troubles, the crazy population growth in the colonies and the constant border conflicts with American Indians meant that the cost of running the colonies had increased fivefold. So it made all the sense in the world from their perspective to restrain the westward migration of the colonists, if only to take a minute to recover economically. But then something else started making sense to Great Britain. What I mean is, since the colonists were reaping some of the rewards of the victory, it made sense that they would help pay for the war that gave them those rewards. Mama was like, hey, I'll buy you the car, but you better get a job because you're gonna have to pay for the gas and insurance. And so in order to make the colonists foot their part of the war bill, Parliament passed a number of new taxation and trade laws that would force the colonies to serve the economy of Great Britain. And that's gonna cause more than a little tension, but that juicy story is for the next video. Okay, you can click here to keep watching my other Unit 3 videos, or you can click here to grab my APUSH Heimler review guide, which has everything you need to study as fast as possible. I appreciate you stopping by, and I'll catch you on the flip-flop. Heimler out.